We should go live.
Welcome to the flip-flopped Red Couch Theology podcast.
Yeah.
The one where
you're gonna
I
have
ask
to do
you
a better
the
job
questions.
than that.
Flippity flop.
You got to say it with confidence and excitement. Welcome to the Red Couch Theology podcast.
I am not confident simply because our whole flow is flipped upside down, where usually you ask the questions and then try and make sense of my random connection of stories and anecdotes. And now I have to ask you questions.
I mean, I could still ask you questions. Why in the world did you make me preach this topic?
Well, yeah, that's a good question.
There you go.
Although I would say, full disclosure to everyone out there, you picked it.
You gave me two options.
And you said you felt God was telling you to preach on generosity.
No, that's not what I said.
Wasn't it?
What I said was it didn't feel right to preach on fasting on Super Bowl Sunday. And so, by default, that meant generosity was the other option.
Oh, no, I think that was a perfect escape to be able to say you should fast, but you don't have to do it today. It's a perfect mixture of law and grace.
Yeah, no, it was one of those deals. And I actually think that you are maybe a better suited to talk about fasting than I am. Or I'm more intrigued by you talking about it than I am.
Yeah, we'll see. But you've also been on a silent retreat, which
I just got back from a silent retreat.
Man. Do you feel very much like you don't care about anything?
No, this silent retreat was different. It was a little bit more like work done stuff, which was weird.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. I was kind of like, I was going in it to just rest and rejuvenate and stuff. And then on Saturday before the silent retreat, I went for a long run. I was just praying and I felt like the Lord was saying like, no, I really want you to do some heavy processing of stuff. And I was like, really? Okay. So I spent like the first night was just like getting ducks in a row, trying to make sure that I could genuinely be away. So it was like, I sent a few emails, got stuff off my plate so I could be present, and then went to dinner, read, and then went to bed. Like that was the first night. And then the second day, I spent the first half of the day just sort of like general pondering, relaxing, reading a little bit, spending time with Jesus. And then around lunchtime, I was like, all right, I got to get some processing done. So it was like pull out the laptop, journaling, mind mapping, moving stuff around in my mind and stuff. And then I couldn't like figure it out. So I stayed up till like midnight with that. I just couldn't go to sleep.
Wow.
And then I woke up at 4 a.m. the next day.
That makes you the first guy ever that couldn't sleep, apparently.
The first time it's ever happened to me. Anyway, I ended up like the second night, I didn't sleep hardly at all.
Wow.
Because I was like, which is very different for a silent retreat. Part of the value of it is that I get a lot more sleep. So
totally. And
anyway,
that's what
there you
I
go.
did.
There's my summary of my
Well, there we
silent
go.
retreat.
Yours was deeply work involved, and on mine, I read a quarter of the Count of Monte Cristo. Two different ways to do silent retreats for all of you.
I was telling someone that I wish I could just bottle my first two silent retreats and repeat them every single time.
But I said that to someone, I am always jealous of someone going on a silent retreat for the first time.
Yeah.
Because it catches you off guard. I'm like, you have no idea how good this is going to be.
Yeah.
Whereas when you go again, you're like, I kind of know what to expect. And then there's almost like a expectation that it's going to work a certain way.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is the first time unlocks something at you that you will never have closed again. So like, I think my very first retreat was realizing how physically and emotionally exhausted I was.
Yeah.
The shocking part was just the sheer quantity of sleeping I did. And I've never been as tired since.
Sure.
Because it was like, oh no, I will never go back to that.
Yeah, this is
then
an unwise way to live.
I can never enter into a silent retreat and experience that level of exhaustion because I don't go there anymore.
Yes.
There's that. And then
That's
the
probably a good
second
thing.
one was like this emotional, like overload of God's love for me and like experiencing his presence in some powerful ways. And similarly, I experience it more generally all the time.
Yeah.
So neither one of those is true. So every subsequent retreat has been different.
Yeah.
But it's not been not quite as powerful.
Yeah. To pitch silent retreats before we get onto generosity, I would say what it reminds me of is this. Silent retreats are like the feeling of getting like not dangerously sick. You know, have you seen it's in a movie, there's this woman that's like, you know, sometimes like I fantasize about getting in a car accident. Like, and I don't get seriously injured, but I do get injured. And I have to go to hospital and people wait on me for like 2 weeks and they bring me stuff and I don't have to do anything. And she's talking about like how much I would love to experience this. And that was what I felt like when I had my gallbladder out. I'm like, I'm kind of annoyed this happened. I like being healthy, but like for the first time in years, it feels like no one expects me to do anything at this moment.
Yeah.
I felt like all of like someone's calling me saying, I should probably preach for you. I was so drugged up, I don't even remember that conversation. Came into the office to try and get a sermon ready for Sunday, and someone was like, I'm already working on that. And I look back at my text messages, and we'd had this text message conversation where she'd said, no, I'll preach this week. And that feeling of like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
In actual fact, the major reaction, the most consistent reaction that one doctor talks about to people that get very sick or find out that they're actually very sick is relief. Because they no longer feel like they have to keep running, even though they feel like they can't.
Yeah. I remember when I first got COVID, and it was pretty early on in the scare where we're like, we don't know how bad this actually is. Like everyone was a little bit confused. And so like there was like way more fears in that stage. And so we're like, I was just like, well, out of safety, I'm going to like full on isolate. And so I just locked myself in a room for 2 full weeks because all the data was conflicting. Is it 2 weeks? Are you contagious this time or this time? I was like, well, I just locked myself in a bedroom and they like slid food under the door to me. It was like this huge sense of relief. Like I just couldn't do anything. It was actually a gift.
And so silent retreats are actually like an intentionally chosen entering into that kind of rest.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it is, you know, obviously one of the major things you'll notice is that there is generally more silence. You hear fans spinning and clicking. Yeah. You hear like the regular sounds of like life or you just pay attention to those kinds of sounds. But 2, so that like heightens your sense of hearing. It like makes your hearing more palpable.
Yeah.
And then another thing that more at a soul level is it makes responsibility or the need to show up for other humans more consciously aware.
Yeah.
In such that like you're aware of like a glance from another human is almost an invasion of space. It's almost like they're getting in, like if they like give you a head nod. Yeah. And you have to like reciprocate with head nod. It's like, you're like in my personal space.
Yeah.
Dude.
What are you doing?
So what happened?
It actually teaches what it is to be British.
No, but like, it's just kind of interesting. Like, what is it about being human that we live under the scrutiny of other human beings and there's an expectation of interaction?
Yeah. And what is it about personality that comes out there? Because I would say I'm the initiator of the head nod. I'm like the person that goes around nodding heads to people because I like,
well, so do I.
That kind of like thing.
So do I, but I don't notice it any other time of my life.
Yeah.
But then when I'm on a silent retreat, I'm like, do they want to not be noticed? Or at this particular retreat, I recognized 3 different people, maybe 4 people who were on retreat. And it was like,
you knew people there?
I knew 4 different people.
That must be awful.
And so I was like, should I say hello? Should I not? Should I try and ignore them? And these are weird questions to even have to
I want to get together
consider.
and watch the basketball game tonight. Like, you want to come to my cell, or do you want to?
Yeah. Anyway, it's just like a weird. You're not aware of those kind of things until they're not expected of you.
Yeah.
And so, to expand the story way beyond what it was necessary, one of the things that happened this time around that made me aware of all this, because I've been on multiple treats and never even thought about this, was I went to the wrong room. And
You went
so
to somebody else's room.
I went to someone else's room. So they have a little sheet. You walk in, your name's on there and your room number. And I thought I saw room 50, and it was actually 51. So I checked off my name like they asked you to, and I walked upstairs. I put down my stuff. I'd already had like a pretty busy morning. And so I went ahead and like just hopped into bed and zonked out. And then this poor gentleman comes like walking up for his retreat and opens up, and like the door, I had the little latch thing over the door, and he goes clunk, and I'm just like yanked from this deep nap, and I come and I'm like, he's like, and then he speaks to me, which is shocking.
How dare you?
It's like a weird thing. Like it's a weird environment. Anyway, so he speaks to me. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was supposed to be in room 50. I must be wrong. And he leaves. And the first thing that pops in my head was, well, either he's wrong or I'm wrong. I don't want to let this
and
poor
then
guy.
you know you. So.
Yeah, and then I know me, and the chances of it being me being wrong is very, very high. So I decide I'm not going to let this guy just go down there, solve the problem, especially if it's on me.
Mm-hmm.
So then I like kind of like rub the like sleep out of my eyes, and then throw on my slippers and open the door, and I go down the hall to try and find this guy. I go to the little thing. I realize it's me. I'm the idiot. You know, I'm not
Taylor Swift.
I'm the idiot. I'm the problem. It's me. And then I don't know who this guy is. So then I'm walking around the space just talking to everyone.
Yeah.
Were you supposed to be in room 50? Are you supposed to be in room 50?
You ruined like 6 last
I know.
retreats.
I ruined so many people's silent retreats. They were about to hear from the voice of God himself, and I wrecked it. Were you supposed to be in 50? And then finally I found the guy.
They were all on their podcasts all over the place talking about this moment.
So I finally find the guy. He's just like sitting in the lounge, like dazed and confused.
With his bag next to him.
With his bag next to him. I was like, did you come looking for room 50? And he goes, yes. And I said, I'm the one that's wrong. I am so sorry. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. And he's like, it's okay. Let's just switch. And then we switch. But then I'm like aware of this guy for the whole retreat. Like,
so every
I'm
time
the idiot.
You're like,
so what is it about being human that like there's like even this level of shame that's just this low grade shame that I'm experiencing throughout this whole retreat, because I've wrecked this guy's retreat, everyone else's retreat. I'm supposed to be out from under any expectation of human existence.
And now you found it.
And I found shame.
And he doesn't even care.
And he doesn't give a darn.
He's just like in his new room, and
he's fine.
Yeah.
His room was probably even better.
That's possibly true. And it's so funny how you notice those little things maybe on retreat. This is my silly like confession moment of retreat. I didn't have that moment, but I went to my room, and it was not ready. And the housekeeper was off for the day. So I went back and said, oh, there's other rooms like next to my room that are free. And she's like, no. Those are all like reserved, so or taken, so or need remaking. So I'm going to put you in this room, which is on the worst side of the building. Silly thing to care about on retreat, but it overlooks a parking lot, and I don't care for that. I have an office that overlooks a parking lot. So like or for the 2 days, I've every time I come out of my room, I've got this eye on the room that's opposite mine that has the better view. And no one ever went in it, and the bed was perfectly made. I'm like, she just doesn't know her room numbers. And there it is. That room is completely free, and I could have been in it. And the only difference is I would have gazed out of a better window for about 6 seconds a day. Totally inconsequential, but got a little under my skin for some bizarre reason, because I don't have enough to think about really on a silent retreat. So all that to say,
so I guess
if you want to see into the depths of your soul,
it heightens it increases the loudness of your own brokenness, your own humanity. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
But
if
before
wanna
you went on
really
your
find out how
retreat-
weird you are.
Before you went on retreat,
Mm-hmm.
you preached on generosity.
Yes, I did.
Is that an easy subject for you to preach on?
No.
Huh.
Is it an easy subject for any preacher to preach on?
You know, maybe there's someone who's genuinely generous and it flows out of them, so they actually can, like, I have regularly described myself as aspirationally generous.
Yeah. I think, like, I think one of the reasons the topic in general has like it's a difficult topic for pastors to talk about in general is because it can approach feeling self-serving.
Yeah.
You know, give more to the church so that my salary can be paid.
Yeah.
It feels like self-serving in that sense.
Yeah.
Fortunately for me, like I'd never really been asked. This is my first time ever talking about that. Well, that's not true. Actually, I talked about the passage right after the Lord's Prayer on the storing up treasures in heaven.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
And it was a lot about generosity and giving.
I forgot about that, yeah.
So anyway, and that passage at least awakened my soul to the goodness and beauty of this invitation to not be like overwhelmed by the topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a hard topic for me to talk about, not because generosity is, but because I'm really a lot of my fears center around money. A lot of my personal brokenness and stuff is heightened when the subject of money enters the conversation.
Yeah.
And generosity sort of wiggles its way into that space and says, hey, let's play around in your brokenness for a while. So in that sense, yes.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
So I think I have similar feelings. My upbringing, I think I've probably talked about this before. My upbringing definitely tended towards like not feeling like we had enough money. So there was that sense of like, oh my goodness, like I feel like everyone else around us has more. And of course you don't know that, but I had friends that would talk about like, oh, I got these 15 things for Christmas. And my family were a little bit more like, you can pick one gift for about $30 or for about $40, $50. And there was like a few other little things like around. It always felt like a good Christmas. Like I love looking at my Christmas retrospectively.
Yeah.
But it always felt like personally, like everyone else at school had a lot more.
Yeah.
So like that made you think like, oh, you're the one that's trying to play catch up. And then if your mentality is like, I'm trying to catch up with everybody else, well, then how do you give away resources? Like if your job is to like have enough, then everyone else has got more. So like you're like desperately gathering to try and keep up.
Yeah.
And then your job is to let go of nothing.
Yeah.
So that you can like, how you can't catch up with someone by going slower. So some of that, like I think just those early years of like not having enough are ingrained.
Yeah, I have a friend who's like an expert and works with missionary kids for his whole career. And one of the things he said, because I was expressing to him, this is a struggle that I have. He's like, oh, that's like such a common struggle for missionary kids because one, you don't go into global missions to make lots of money. So one, your family tends to be a little bit on that lower income level. Two, your entire life is subsidized by generosity of others. And so there's always this like every dollar you spend feels like you're responsible to the donor.
Yeah. Terrible.
And there's some of that with maybe for pastors' kids
I think so,
too.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't really ever think about it. Unlike you, like we didn't have a ton of stuff growing up, and we were obviously my parents didn't make a ton of money as a missionary kid. It wasn't on my radar.
But the years I'm talking about, you lived in Rwanda.
Yeah.
So you didn't exactly have a whole bunch of people to compare like that sense of like.
And so in that sense, I wasn't conscious of any sense of poverty. I didn't know what I was missing. And when I moved back to the States, I didn't care. I was trying to figure out like social cues, but I wasn't aware that until much, much later that the fact that I was wearing pants that were too small or whatever made me a nerd or something, and it rejected by the social society. It just didn't cross my mind that was one of the variables until much later in life. So, but it does create this messed up relationship with money.
Yeah.
But part of what I was preaching about in this sermon is that I don't think that that's unique to the fact that you grew up in not a super wealthy home and I grew up as a missionary kid. I think it's all the way back to the very foundation of humanity and the fall of man.
Yeah.
So one of the statements I made in the message was that anxiety about not having enough is humanity's oldest predator because it's the crux of the fall of man.
Yes. Yeah.
Part of the question mark that the serpent asks Adam and Eve is about God holding out some resource for them.
Yeah, you have everything except one thing.
Yeah. Why is that? Yeah. What's up with that? What's God holding out on you for?
Yeah.
And there's this good and beautiful thing that you could have if you just had a little bit more than the entire abundance of the garden.
Yeah.
And so that question, that doubt that there's a limited amount of resources and God is withholding something from you is at the very core of the broken condition of the human race.
Well, and that apparently statistically the number one answer people will give if you ask them how much more they need is about 10%. So like Donald Trump famously answered it with theoretically billions of dollars. Who knows, how much he has. Could be way more, could be way less. But someone said to him, how much more would you need to be happy? And he's like, about 10%. And apparently, statistically, almost every family in America will say just about 10%. But then if they get it the next year, if you ask them, they'll say about 10%. It's something about our ability to live there. Now, which is fascinating when you think that over years, like the idea of a tithe is 10%, the idea of even amongst scientific processes around giving is if you can give away 10% of your income, that's a healthy thing for your soul on some level, or your cognitive brain, whatever, and on some level there's this idea. So it's just fascinating that the longing for about 10% more and the threat then of giving away a chunk, it speaks to that sense of will I have enough? And am I missing out just like it did thousands of years ago?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it's not just related to finances. I mean, we if you think about it a little bit, you start to realize that obviously that it's not just money. The currency that we currently use didn't exist in ancient times.
It can't just be fiat currency.
Yeah, it's not fiat currency. It's provision, food.
Yeah.
It's safety. I mean, if you think about it, it's the very core of being a creature.
Yeah.
Our brains are wired to try and hoard calories, find safe places to live, and so that you're not attacked from the outside and your physical safety is not harmed. And as social creatures, relationship. So there's a limited amount of relational capital that can be had. And so all the things that we need to be if you're just we're not at all on the same level as animals. But if you were to reduce the human experience to animalistic urges, it's all that stuff. Is there safety?
Yeah.
Is there food? Do I have is there water? Is there shelter? Is there predators going to get me? All of that stuff. Is there social capital as a social animal?
Yeah.
If your safety is contingent upon the strength of the crowd, then where do I fit inside the social structures and the social hierarchy? All of these different variables, and our very physiology is crying out to us that there isn't enough. You've got to, when you find a resource, you hoard it.
Yeah.
When you find safety, you double down on it. You build a wall around yourself, and then you layer another wall around it, and then you put cameras in there to make sure that no one can get into a safe place.
Yeah.
It's the very core of all of our creaturely fears. And it's the story that's been on rinse and repeat throughout all of human history.
Yeah, I wonder how many people would say like, I wish my house was like 10% bigger. I wonder how many people would say like, I wish the walls that protect us were 10% thicker, or like, you just like, I wonder how much there's
is this a safe neighborhood?
It's just not quite enough for me.
Yeah.
It just, I've used before Monty Burns, his famous like example of like, I am rich, but I traded all for a little more.
Yeah.
It's like so true of human nature, just a little more.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it's very counterintuitive for us to stiff arm something that even our biology tells us to do.
Mm. Yeah.
Like our biology says, don't get eaten.
Yeah.
Make sure you eat.
Yeah.
Like your biology.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah. Like when you're hungry, that's a physiological response to a lack of calories, or an addiction to sugar. One of the two. Something like that. Yeah. But the bottom line is, if you were to fast for days and days and days on end, that feeling of hunger rises because you need caloric input.
Yeah.
And a thirst, same thing. Like it's a physiological response. And so deep down at the heart of what it means to be a human creature, to be embodied creatures, is this anxiety about not having enough. And generosity is basically this like flipping of the bird to that system and saying, you know what? I'm not just a creature. I'm a creature in God's abundant universe.
Yeah.
Where there is more than enough resources.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting because these 3 weeks of sermons in a row, you preached on generosity. Sean this week is going to preach on hospitality. And I'm preaching on Sabbath. So
not fasting?
And then fasting.
Oh, well, the daily will be about fasting.
Okay. Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't even, like I'm thinking about both of them.
Okay, good.
I could be wrong.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yes.
So like,
Sabbath, yeah.
But when you think about they all start to play with some of the same struggles, because hospitality invites people in and you share some resources that you
and sometimes dangerous people.
Yeah.
Outsiders.
Yeah, sometimes.
You don't even know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's whole wonderful stories in like parts of the world that are somewhat impoverished, that have learned extravagant generosity, surprisingly, in a way that we may not have. And then fasting is about saying no to a
physiological urge,
to some urges.
Yeah.
And then Sabbath is actually, like, as much as the Sabbath story is about rest, it's about resources as well.
Yeah. It's about, I'm not going to work, which is the thing I think is going to get me enough resources and money. Yeah.
Yeah. So in actual fact, there's lots of people that would say, no, I could not work if I knew the resources would be there, but I feel like I need to get what I need.
Yeah.
And Sabbath is about, like, at least on its first moment of introduction, this moment of like, no, trust me. Now, like, whether it becomes easier to trust, hopefully it becomes easier to trust as you see there's the provision.
Yeah.
There's a famous store in England, and Chick-fil-A is probably more famous for here. And for some reason, this was my first example. Chick-fil-A famously doesn't open on Sundays.
Yeah.
This small little toy store in England also has never opened on Sundays, and it's got a prominent place. It pays a fine in the shopping mall it's in every Sunday for not opening.
Yeah.
And even on, like, there was one day when the day before Christmas Eve, the busiest shopping day in the year, fell on a Sunday. And people were like, surely you're going to open now. And the guy's like, no.
Nope.
Like, principle. Like so fascinating how all these, I didn't really think about it in the planning, but they all do.
Yeah, I actually thought about the Chick-fil-A thing as an illustration of this. It's a posture of generosity to stay closed.
Yeah.
Not because they're necessarily giving anything away, but it gets at the same human brokenness.
Yes.
To say, you know what? I don't care what the world says.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what my physiology says. What God says goes.
Yeah.
And what that means is that there's enough. God's world is teeming with life, teeming with energy, teeming with resources, and there is more than enough in God's created universe to sustain the life and the goodness and the beauty of his world. The problem is it's actually this hoarding mentality that starts to undermine the life-giving nature of God's created order. That need to get more and more and more means that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So like the separation between the upper class and the lower class is driven by this very brokenness. Yeah. And when we choose to be generous, or we choose to take Sabbath, or we choose to be hospitable, we choose to say, I'm not playing that game anymore.
Yes, yeah.
I'm going to sit inside of God's world, which says that there's going to be enough, even if I don't think so.
Yeah. So is generosity then? Is it about obeying God, and there's no benefit to you, like on a psychological level, or is it also a benefit to you on a psychological level? Surprisingly,
yeah. I mean, I think it's both, right? Part of our generosity, like I had this image that I didn't have time to get into as an illustration, but imagine you're like sitting in a church service and there's a moment of prayer and there's someone in the room crying out to God for resources. Lord, I just don't know how I'm going to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And he's comforting them saying, trust me, trust me, trust me. And in the same room, someone else is praying, Lord, can help me to let go of control. I choose to be generous today, and I'm going to give a little extra as an act of worship and faith in you. And God's interacting with both people, and he's moving resources from one to the other because, someone gives money and then that comes back in benevolence and cares for this person. But interestingly, his comfort and his provision and his presence is accessible to both. Both in there. One's need monetarily, one's excess monetarily, or excess of control. And I think it's deeply powerful for us as human beings to fight against our natural inclination to believe that there isn't enough, because that's just not true.
There was this church that Laura and I visited out in Grand Rapids, and they did this thing where it was called the White Buckets Project. And so one Sunday, the pastor gets up and he says, what we're going to do at the end of the service. He's been talking about I think it was the Acts 2 passage. And he said, so what we're going to do is we've got these buckets at the front. And he said, if you walked in leaping, you have more than enough. God has been good to you. We're going to invite you to come in and put money into these buckets. And if you need something, we're going to invite you to come and take money out of these buckets. And they're doing this live, like a couple of thousand people.
I think we did this once, right?
I have never had the nerve to do this. I'm like, to me, like it's like it's so beautiful. I'm listening to it and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. But to have the faith to do it.
And I think it takes almost more guts to go and take something.
Probably, yeah.
Than to put something
in.
And
part of the practical elements are like, does it still work now? Like almost nobody carries cash anymore. Almost nobody carries a checkbook anymore.
Yep.
Like it worked back in the mid 2000 and whatever, because there was like a whole bunch of people that just came and they dropped cash in. But there were stories about people like that would come and they'd see a blank check, like a check with a number on but no name. And they'd say, oh, that's the amount I need. And they'd fill their name in on the check. I mean, just incredible.
That's cool.
To see that kind of like, now theoretically, like that's just the mechanism by which that kind of generosity happens. We've had stories here of people like dropping envelopes off of people saying like, can you give this to this person?
Yeah.
Like, this is for this need.
Yeah. And I could have told so many stories like that. That's one of my regrets, is that I felt like I went long enough that I couldn't actually tell some practical stories related to it. But I was wanting to debunk the idea that there isn't enough.
Yeah.
And articulate, which I think this passage does, that generosity is an invitation that is good for you as the giver.
Yeah.
And that it's not just generosity, it's a kind of generosity. This cheerful, joyful, like excited to be in the game kind of generosity that you see in this Corinthians passage that Paul's inviting them to. And so I spent my time doing that, but like I have stories of literally a box of $1 bills, a brown box of $1 bills showed up on Allison and my doorstep once. The weirdest generosity I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
But it was probably $300 in $1 bills.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
And we've had stuff like that happen to us, and where someone just showed up and was generous. And so,
and those moments, like it is so interesting to me that Jesus actually said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Because on the surface of it, I think most of us would say, "What? Like, you're wrong." Like if Jesus wasn't who he is, like you'd look at it on the surface and maybe say, like, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
Like the joy of receiving to me has been wonderful.
Yes. But interestingly, I know I wanted to say this on Sunday again, just ran out of time. The most generous people I know, like, you can see a twinkle in their
Oh
eyes.
yeah, totally. Yeah.
There is like this weird like giddiness around giving.
Or something like that.
They've truly tapped in to this life-giving power that generosity can give you, and they just can't wait to find another. And interestingly, they're not all wealthy.
No.
But also because of the principle in this Corinthians text, which is kind of a mind-blowing principle.
Yeah.
You reap what you sow. Like if you sow little, you reap little. So much, you reap much. That's a difficult theological concept to wrap our minds around because it feels prosperity gospel-esque and all. We could get in that if we wanted to. But because of that principle, most of the most generous people I know are also financially stable. They may not be filthy rich, but they are steady as a rock financially. Weird.
Yeah.
And it taps into this idea that some of them are just really, really powerfully good penny pinchers.
Yeah.
Because they're so excited about generosity that they can't help. They're like, I'm going to be so frugal because I can't help but give.
Yeah.
And then the end result is they're not tons of debt. They tend to be stable. Or there's people who are just filthy rich. They could have multiple $1 million homes all over the country, and they choose to live in this small thing, and they give away millions and millions of dollars a year. Same thing. They're stable.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because the pursuit of wealth can lead you to a point where you won't give up anything.
Yeah.
Like you have to tear it out of people's hands. They're like, no, we got this. Like, unless I can give it like as a write-off or something like that, like nothing, no resources leave my hands.
Yep.
Like did you ever watch DuckTales, Scrooge McDuck?
Yeah.
Like he's just like, he's got this vast wealth and he's like, no, I'm keeping all of it. Like there's, no one's getting enough me. And then there's a pursuit of at least frugality, not in order to achieve massive wealth, but to achieve large giving that you're talking about. One seems to lead to some kind of like spiritual death of some kind, like it leads to you reducing as a person. And the one leads to like this life that's just beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
And those people, I've always been curious about whether God trusts some people with wealth or not.
Yeah.
I have not felt like I'm a person that would handle wealth well.
Yeah.
And that's maybe why I don't have it. despite the fact that, you know the statistics, and if you have money in a bank account, you're moderately wealthy compared to lots of people.
Yeah.
I also have tons of debt.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that sum works.
Yeah.
But I think that there are certainly some people that I think God says, for you, it would not be good to have this kind of wealth.
Yeah. And actually, I think the whole conversation around it is maybe a little bit confusing for God to listen to.
Yeah, sure.
Like he understands humanity and stuff.
Yeah.
But here's the reality. If we are members of the kingdom of God, we are filthy rich.
Yeah.
Resource-wise. Like,
yes.
So, and that's part of the pushback that the scriptures offer the human condition is you're like, but I don't feel filthy rich. And I think it is not a mistake that the scriptures talk about this feeling of this anxiety of not having enough being part of the fall of humanity. I don't think it's an accident because we weren't designed to carry anxiety around that.
Yes.
Like human creatures were not meant to carry the weight of providing for ourselves.
Do you think so
like
on that whole, do you think that the Old Testament talks about wealth differently to the New Testament? Or do you think it's consistent? Because I do feel like there's times where the Old Testament seems to, like, when it wants to emphasize the fact that someone is blessed in some way, I'm using the blessed term a bit arbitrarily, but it will emphasize, like, oh, Abraham had this many sheep and this many cattle and he collected all this stuff. And it will say that so-and-so, like, and it doesn't necessarily articulate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it says it for a reason.
I still think the message around wealth is, like, wealth, in my estimation, both Old and New Testament is it's innocuous. It's neutral. Having much resources and having little resources is neutral.
Yeah.
It's the soul's relationship with those resources that makes it either beautiful or evil, downright evil. And interestingly, the thing that, like this, the emotion of I need to take care of myself, me and mine, safety, hoard, that kind of reaction to our needs is a toxic reaction to the soul. And I gave just a couple statistics from neuroscience that talked about, like, you literally are dumber. You make worse decisions when there's anxiety about not having enough. You're less of a kind person.
Yeah.
Which I illustrated with my own story about getting mad at my family for wanting toilet paper, which, by the way, there's some toilet paper in my office this morning with a little note on it that says, like, from a generous soul. It was awesome.
That's brilliant.
And you're actually a worse financial steward when you have anxiety about not having enough. So, like, if you're poor, you tend to make worse financial decisions.
I think that's true. And it's interesting that I've tried to learn to celebrate some of my kids' casualness with money. Like, we're trying to teach them to be wise and generous with it. So, like, when they earn money, we try and, reemphasize, like, what do you want to give that to? Doesn't have to be church, but give it to something.
Yeah.
But that sense of, like, they don't have the same nervousness about wasting things that I had as a kid. I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, like, you'll learn to not have my sense of,
or weirdly,
of lack.
One of them will and the other one won't.
Yeah, maybe
same
so.
household.
You're
like, what is wrong? Like,
but I do think you're right that the consistent message of Scripture is, I think, didn't C.S. Lewis phrase it something like, the man who has everything plus Jesus has no more than the man that has nothing plus Jesus.
Yeah, that's
like there's just, like, you when you're talking about the infinite, piling on some more stuff just doesn't move the number. It just simply says like, oh yeah, those are non-countable extras. They just get thrown in.
Yeah. And so I think you already brought this up, but I find it fascinating that in a series about spiritual disciplines, I don't know if I'd have to vet this out through each spiritual discipline, but the majority of these disciplines, maybe all of them, I don't know, are trying to convince your human brokenness that it's going to be okay if you're engaged with God.
Sure.
And so it's just like, these are just levers in your soul that says, you know what? That lie that says there's not enough, it's a lie.
Yeah.
Like it levers, it accesses that part of your soul that says there's not enough.
Yeah.
And so when we say, all right, I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm going to give some away.
Yeah.
And you find out, is the world going to explode?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, there was enough.
Yeah.
And weirdly, like a generous gift came back. And I don't know how that works. And that's a theologically confusing and emotionally taxing thing for us to think about when it comes to like the prosperity gospel and all that stuff. But we start to believe that God's universe is enough.
Yeah.
And then fasting. Like my body says there's not enough food. And you're like, oh, but there is a food that you know not of.
Well, we know like just as an example of that feeling, you know, when you try and hold your breath, like, and most people can hold their breath for somewhere around like between, it's quite a large number, like between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. And then there's some people that will train their body to hold their breath for like 6 minutes, 7 minutes. But the feeling that you have when your body is like, breathe, 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 has nothing to do with oxygen.
Yeah, it's a lie.
It's everything to do with your body's expectation about what comes in. And it's fear that there won't be enough at some point.
Yeah, it's a buildup of carbon dioxide in the system that burns.
Yeah.
But it is only the very, very early warning sign that you should take a breath.
Yeah.
You've still got 6 minutes to go before there's actually a low
amount. What your chest tells you is like,
I need that.
It really sends you into that almost like spasm.
Yeah.
I've got to breathe. I've got to breathe.
Meanwhile, you've got like 90% of your lung capacity still full of oxygen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that is a trigger response that's true of like so many things in our lives, like that sense of like, so practicing generosity is a way of increasing that body's sense of comfort in not taking the next breath. Like you don't actually need the new car in the way that you believe you do.
Yeah.
You don't actually need the savings that you do. I have a friend who may be listening and no one knows who he is, so it's fine. But, you know, he and I were talking about like, you know, right now we're down to like $50,000 cash resources. I'm like, dude, I have never had $50,000 in my life. And we're okay. Like you know, you may have been told that you need that, but need is a very strong ideal, maybe, who knows? But the fact that you've been told that you need that is probably not accurate.
Yeah. It's being human's a weird thing.
It is.
And these spiritual practices. So I tried to emphasize this particular passage in this context, which was interesting for me. Because one, this isn't more getting into like the mechanics of preaching a sermon. I kind of came to the topic with a few agendas. You know, one, the general agenda was what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Like there's this general, it's good for the soul, it's healthy. I had that in my mind. I wanted to communicate that. Two was a very much more South specific, our community and how we pool our resources as a church family. And because frankly, we're falling behind when it comes to giving. So I wanted to say something about that. I didn't want to instill shame. Part of what I wanted to say was like, that's actually fine because maybe our lack of community resources as a church family is a sign that we need to shift our strategy around what we're doing.
Yeah.
And like, or maybe some of us are disobedient. And like, I don't know which one it is. Only God knows the answer to that question. And so I wanted to be very much more South specific. And then I started studying this particular passage, which, in God's wisdom, I selected this text. And as I studied, I started to realize, well, first of all, too much of my study time already went into it to bail and go a different direction to follow my agenda. But two, it's actually one of the most beautiful things I've found when it comes to preaching, where a lot of the time, maybe 90% of the time, I go into a sermon thinking I have a direction and the text takes me on a detour. Not often, like way off into a totally different thing, but in like a nuance that I wasn't expecting and that I felt like I had to do, and which was counterintuitive, that this Corinthian church is probably filthy rich.
Yes.
And it's young money.
At least the people in it are, whether the church.
Yeah, the church itself might not have been or whatever, but it's a very affluent city.
Yeah.
It's at this crossroads. And so then I was like, well, how's that relate to South that's falling behind financially? And I had to like take my agendas and be like, okay, and set them aside. And then I started to approach this thing. And then I started to ask those questions that I mentioned in the sermon. That's like, Paul's trying to, part of his agenda in this letter is to like restore relationship with this church. Why would he talk about money?
Yeah.
As a means by which to communicate restoration and hope to a church that's kind of sheepish and shameful, and they've been put in their place, and they're like, so they're this wealthy church, young, most likely pretty young church because of the makeup of this city. They've been put in their place by Pastor Paul, and they've kind of like tail between their legs, come back to him and said, we're sorry, you're right, Paul. He writes them this letter to encourage them, and then chooses to talk about money for 2 full chapters with unashamed asks. He gives like strategy. I want you to pick out people to carry the money. He talks a lot about money with his church. In his first letter, he talks a lot about money. I'm like, this is a very confused Pastor Paul. Why would he choose this topic? And as I continued to study the makeup of generosity, I started to realize, it's so wise for Paul to get access to this little church's souls by inviting them in. So his invitation to be generous was an invitation back into kingdom work. They're sheepish, they're shame-filled maybe, all of that kind of stuff. And he's saying like, get back in the game. And one of the things you have quickest access to is to give financially to the church in Jerusalem. It's going to make you feel like you're part of this bigger movement. You're not in this isolated town that's all about materialism, which is what the city's known for. It sort of breaks the cycle of shame. It breaks the cycle of their feeling like they have control. They beat Paul over the head with their money. And so he like takes the stick out of their hand and says, what this stick is for? It's for caring for the God's kingdom and world. I think it's deeply wise. And the way that translates to us in our day and age is that, actually, the Jerusalem church is going to benefit from this gift. I think Pastor Paul is trying to get into the hearts of this church and heal something that only generosity could.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, there's my little rambling again.
So talk about the part, because I was kind of like nodding. I was like, I'm with you. Yeah, absolutely. And then talk about the part where you said, like, maybe you need to stop giving. Because I had some questions.
What are your questions?
Why?
Well, I think it's important for, like, one of the things that I love about South and the way it's grown especially over the last few years under your leadership, is that we have a lot of folks who have broken relationships with the local church.
Yeah.
They've been hurt by the local church. They're kind of like 1 foot, 1 out. They're like, a church can be a very dangerous place for the soul. Like if religion is weaponized, it's one of the most powerful weapons to break souls. So a lot of folks who attend South might be in that place. And so I felt like Paul's banging of the drum of like, it has to be a certain kind of giving. It's not just about giving. It has to be a cheerful giving. It has to be a willing giving. I wanted to make sure that those in our community realize, like, just like Paul isn't saying God's nervous about how he's going to make budget, so you really need to give. That is not a thought God has ever had.
Cattle on 1,000 hills.
Infinite resources.
The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And beyond that as well.
Yeah. Like every single molecule in the universe belongs to him. Like, and there's so many texts all throughout the Old Testament that are comical when it like talks about that sense that we might have about God, that he's really worried about making budget. That's just not true. And if that's how God feels about his work in the world, then we need to, as a church leadership and as pastors, be honest about that. Like if South is supposed to continue going, it will, whether people give or not, an individual gives or not, that's going to happen. It can't be stopped. And if South is supposed to close its doors, it can't be stopped. So take the stress off of us, like guilting you into giving, and instead see the gift on the other side of giving, which is this soul freedom from anxiety, freedom from this need to control the world around you, all that stuff. Like, then generosity becomes a gift to the giver. And if you're in that place, you can say, oh, okay, this isn't a health wealth preacher saying, give me your money and I'll send you your healing, or whatever it is that they do. So that's why I said that.
Makes a ton of sense.
Answer your question.
What if people haven't tried anything generosity wise since they heard that? What are some things you would reiterate about, like just ways you could try dabbling in generosity? I know you had a few, but is there any that stand out to you as you've had a few days to? One
that I didn't get a chance to do, partially because we've used it a couple times here over the years here at South, but it's just grab some amount of cash that you feel like, ask the Lord, what's the amount that I feel like I could stomach cheerfully? If that's $5 for you, if that's all you can stomach cheerfully, then get $5 of cash. If it's 20, get $20. If it's 200, whatever it is, grab that cash, put it in your pocket and say, Lord, today or this week, I would like you to reveal a joyful opportunity for me to be generous. And then just carry it around. The last time I did that practice, the stereotypical, I kind of was flabbergasted because it's like, it felt like a stereotypical moment, but I was like, it's happening right now. The person in front of me in the grocery line, their card was declined. And I don't know if it was a single mom or not, but it appeared to be a single mom. At least it was a mom that was frazzled with 2 kids in the cart and was declined. And she tried a second card and it was declined. And I don't know, but I happened to have $200 of cash in my pocket that someone had generously given me. It wasn't even a practice I decided to do. And I was just like, boom. And I just handed it to the guy and she was flabbergasted and I just walked out of the store.
Wow.
And it was this moment of joy where I was like, I don't know who that was. I don't know her story. I don't know any of these different pieces, but it did feel like this gift of freedom and joy to participate in. So there's one.
I love that one.
We gave, we're probably over time.
Yeah, we got like a minute.
Yeah. So,
in that generous allotment of an hour.
Yeah. So another thing, like I mentioned on Sunday, is like find a way to make you aware of your giving. For those of us who have like our auto draft thing, that's not bad. In fact, like I kind of joked about it on Sunday. It's like really helpful for the church to know that there's a monthly income that's auto drafted. But again, it's not about just filling in South's budget. It's about creating generous givers who are cheerful about it. It's about more of us being like the friends you and I have talked about, who kind of get that twinkle in their eye, like, ooh, it's giving week, rather than, I could really use that money. So
I think as well, even just on a level, if you find like the systemized giving of like bank withdrawal, which we use for so many bills now, become kind of normalized to us. A gift in terms of like your preparation, even changing it to weekly, I think has the element of like you come into church and you've got that sense of like, it's not like, oh yeah, my check goes out in like 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I participated in this thing this week with these people. I think that changes a little bit of it as well. Like regular rather than just consistent.
Yeah. Or do a little bit of both. Yeah. Where like there's like a bare, like, and this is another powerful way to do to combine the first recommendation I gave and the second recommendation, where you say, because I believe in the local church, this one of the practices I talked about was like giving to a place where you don't have control. Our church polity is such that the elders make decisions. We don't do congregational vote. Yes. That's actually a terrifying and beautiful gift for a giver to have, because they give their gifts and they don't get to decide where that money's spent. There's a little bit of faith that you have to exercise in God's sovereignty and his wisdom to oversee an elder board and a staff. Yeah. So that's good. But then, set it, forget it, whatever you want to do. But then say, you know what? I'm going to reserve an extra $100 on a card and just have my radar up. Because this is the one that I'm going to do with a cheerfulness and excitement. Yes. Where I get to just, you know what? So-and-so, I'm going to buy you a movie ticket. Yeah. Or someone who did something for us yesterday, a friend of mine just said, you know what? And sent us some money for a date night for Allison. And it was just like, wow. Thank you.
Well, another one, like for like, if you're like South is your home and you're like, I love what's happening here. We have our regular giving, but we'll have like on the drop down menu for our give thing, we'll have like some things that are different. Like MOPS, for example, raises its own money. Yeah. Like you could actually say, you know what? I'm just going to go and I've got this extra that I held. Like I'm going to give that to the MOPS. Leadership team.
Or the student mission trip. This is exciting. There's going to be a fundraiser coming up that's going to be like a garage sale. Let's say you don't have a ton to give financially. Bring some of your stuff and drop it off. Go out of your way to bring the stuff. But also imagine some of the money is not just going to go, like if they raise enough, it'll get some of our students onto the mission field and experiencing some relationships there. But if we raise more, it's going to get the youth group from our partner church here. Yeah, brilliant, right? So wouldn't it be amazing if this fundraiser raised so much that we could fund both Americans going to another country and this youth group from there coming here? And if you're not sure about like the value of your stuff, there's this age-old like saying that one man's junk is another man's treasure. Yeah. I was a very poor youth pastor in a kind of expensive area. At one point, almost everything we owned came from the church rummage sale. Yeah. Like that was the only place we could afford to buy stuff. So every year we'd spend like the few $100s we had furnishing our apartment. And the people that there was one lady that turned up one year with, I think it was a plate set that was worth like $2,000. And she just had it sat in her storage facility for ages. She never used it. Someone had given it to her as a wedding gift or something. Yeah. She got to this point, she said, you know what? This is just wasted here. Like someone got that for, I think, $500. Yeah. They would never have been able to afford it at the price it was. But then the church got $500 towards mission because someone took something that was useless to them. Yeah. And it became useful to someone, and some kids got to go on a mission trip. Right, so many different ways that you get to participate there. Come buy stuff and come bring stuff. Yeah, and maybe one final recommendation, like if you're in a spot where financially you're just really on the down and outs, that does not mean that generosity isn't an option for you. Yeah. Like if you feel like any dollar you gave away was stealing food from your kids, or whatever it may be, remember that this is a spiritual practice that God gives us because he wants something for us. There is so many other ways of being generous.
Yeah.
A posture of generosity, again, it's not about the quantity of money you give or any of those things. It's about, do I trust myself to take care of me, or do I trust God to take care of me? And so the way you can do that is to say, you know what? I'm not going to pick up that extra little, side hustle, and I'm going to volunteer that time. Or it might just be, I want to be generous with my time and energy. Meaning and this is somewhat getting into the idea of Sabbath, I think I need to work every waking minute to make ends meet. And instead, I will not work on Sabbath because I don't make the world go round and I don't take care of my needs. God takes care of my needs. That is similar access to that part of your soul. So you can be generous with your time, with your energy, with your resource, with your volunteering hours. So,
well, there we go. Have a great week, everyone. I can't wait to get back to you asking the questions.
Yeah, it's not nearly as fun.
It's so much better. But
it's so much better when you get to talk the whole time.
Not even that, but just... Yeah. I hope you got something valuable out of that. And if you take away a message of generosity, you definitely did. So thanks, man.
All right.
See you guys next week. Like, subscribe, donate to your favorite charity.
Indeed. Bye.